like to call the meeting to order, the March 24th meeting of the Oklahoma City Economic Development Trust. First item is to approve the minutes of the February 24th meeting. Chair would entertain a motion. Here a second. Please cast your votes. Oh, there's Jim right on time. And motion has carried. We're going to have a reorder of go as we will have a quorum and moving the item I. And item I is a resolution approving the extension and modification of the Oklahoma City Economic Development Trust private placement tax anticipation note relating to funding of redevelopment and improvements within the increment districts numbered 2 and 3, waiving competitive bidding on said note and authorizing extension and modification of the note by negotiation with J.P. Morgan Chase Bank, ratifying, renewing, amending, and extending the note, related security agreement, and also agreement of support between Oklahoma City Economic Development Trust and City of Oklahoma City, and authorizing the execution of documents and payment of costs necessary to effectuate the transactions, which would be through TIP. And Brent, you have some comments relative to that.
Yes, ma'am. This item here extends and it modifies the original $10 million line of credit to $18 million. As we've looked at all of our projects, we realized last year that we were going to have a short-term cash flow situation in this fiscal year. As a result of that, we went out for an RFP. J.P. Morgan came in and proposed, originally it was for $15 million back in April of last year. They originally came back and provided two options. One is a $10 million line of credit at a very low interest rate and with no usage fee, or a $15 million line of credit with a higher interest rate and a usage fee. We opted at that time to go with the $10 million line of credit, which is essentially 60 basis points plus the 30-day LIBOR, which is currently 0.77% on an annual basis. As a result of that, and working with the bank, we needed to increase that because we have multiple projects that are coming to fruition, and some of them are actually on the agenda today where money will be paid out. Currently, we have $3 million in the bank, but we anticipate spending or paying out over $10 million in the next couple of months, and then and even more after that. So with what we're seeking from you today is to amend the line of credit from 10 to 18. What we will also do is we're extending the maturity date, since this is a fiscal year type note, to June 30 of 16. So we will not have to come back at the end of this fiscal year and extend it. We'll actually take it to 2016. I have provided you a handout as pursuant to our debt policies that were approved by you at the last meeting. Anytime we go into debt, we're supposed to provide you how we're planning on paying this debt off. Since this is a variable rate debt line of credit, there's not a fixed amortization schedule. However, we do monitor it on a monthly basis all the way in to the end of the TIF district. Bottom line is we will receive our last TIF payment in June of 2027. And so with that in mind, what we did, we analyzed the cash flow projects with the various interest rates. And what you have here is under financial plan scenario number 1, which is, I based that on like a 0.9% interest rate, a little bit higher than what we're currently paying. Under that, our plan is to pay the accrued interest for June of 15 and June of 16, then beginning in June of 17, pay approximately $3 million in principal along with the accrued interest, and do that all the way down to June of 2020. In addition to that, we kind of did a stress test on this and said, okay, if we go into an interest rate environment that's increasing, and let's say that we end up having to pay a 5% on the average, we looked at that, and after doing that, looking at the cash position of the TIF district, we feel that we can maintain that same payment schedule. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And thank you, Mr. Roth, for being here.
Any questions of Brent?
I do, thank you. Just to clarify on
Yes, sir.
the sheet that you passed out, financial plan scenario 2, it says 410 basis point. Again, that's in addition to the 60, what was the original 10?
Yes, sir. What I did original basis was at 90 basis points, and I added another 410 to it to get to right at 5%. So that's what we did there.
I'd move the item.
Do I hear a second? Okay, please cast your votes. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Brent. Next item on the agenda is to ratify the OSET claims. You have all the claims in your packet. Any questions relative to those claims? Chair would entertain a motion. Do I hear a second? Do I hear a second? Okay. Please cast your votes. Motion carries. Thank you. Got to be a little quicker on the take. Okay. Items for individual consideration. Item A is preliminary report, project MS 0049, sidewalk improvements and authorization to prepare the final plans and specifications. I believe Eric Winger, city engineer, you would have a presentation for us.
Yes, I do, Madam Chair. Thank you. And trustees. We do have a presentation for you this afternoon on the sidewalk improvement project that's in your packet today. This is project MS 0049. It's sidewalk improvements. And what you're going to see is actually a project that's two phases, and I'll explain in just a moment. So as a part of the overview, we'll do a little bit of background, the budget, the scope, the locations, and then the schedule. So this project is advanced to the preliminary report stage, which is what you're being asked to consider today for approval. And the engineer on the project is Crafton, Toll and Associates. It's a local engineering firm that's doing the work. And then these are the two different phases. And so the phases are by funding source. First phase is TIF and grant funded, and it's predominantly for areas of Bricktown, Deep Deuce, Midtown, and Automobile Alley. And then the phase two portion is actually a capital improvement project that was approved by the City Council at various locations throughout the city. And these are being determined off of the MAPS 3 sidewalk master plan report that was done as a part of that program. So this takes additional sidewalk locations from that report that weren't funded by the MAPS program, but additional funds from the City Council and moving that forward. When we look at the cost of the two different, and again, phase one is at the top, you'll see that there's a total construction cost of $855,000 anticipated to be spent under phase one, and under phase two, about $3.1 million. And as we look at the scope of work, so in a lot of cases these are new sidewalks, but there's also some replacements as well. So you're going to see there's the repair of broken sidewalks and filling in gaps to promote additional pedestrian access, connecting a lot of the existing pedestrian routes, ADA enhancements, and then the goal is going to be to complete as many of what we call the base bid items. We're going to actually stretch that budget as far as it will go, but there are some alternate locations included in the event that we actually receive favorable bids on the projects. And so we are intending to fully expend the monies that are available to throughout the city enhance sidewalks for the citizens. So this is the phase one locations, and as I mentioned, these are predominantly in those areas of Bricktown. You'll see those in the lower right. You'll see the Automobile Alleys, areas that are in the center, and then you'll see the Midtown in the upper left-hand portion. These specific locations were based on assessment from the engineer. And you're seeing some of those that we call critical and then those that are also pending. But we're going to address as many of these locations as possible. On the phase two locations, you're going to see these are citywide, and so it's a much bigger drawing. This is of the incomplete city, but you'll see that we've got them north, south, east, and west. And again, these follow that MAPS 3 sidewalk master plan report. So when we look at the schedule, we're looking at phasing the construction into two different phases. The plans for both phases will be completed this spring. But phase two will actually go out ahead of phase one with anticipation of beginning construction summer of 15 and ending in about a year, next year in 16. You'll see the phase one work is expected to start this fall and then again also be completed in about a year. So we do get the question sometimes, why does it take so long to build these sidewalks? And I would tell you that there's nothing normal about sidewalk construction. It requires a lot of quality control on the slopes. There's a lot of ADA ramping improvements. There's tactile warning devices. And in the interest of intersections, I mean, there are intersection upgrades. And so it's a very complicated project. It's much more than just actually just placing some concrete behind the curb. And so the contractors will actually work in small sections, and there will be traffic control and all those things that will go along with this project. And so with that, I'm happy to address any questions that you might have. But today you're approving the preliminary report and authorizing staff to proceed with the final plans.
Any questions of Eric? I do have one question. What is the lifespan of our typical sidewalks in our heat and cold environments in Oklahoma City?
You know, I would tell you that there's a number of sidewalks in the city that are possibly in excess of 50 years old that are still performing as well as the day that they were installed. What we probably find most often, other than just maybe the temperature swings, is the soil conditions underneath the sidewalks. When we find that we've got an expansive soil like clay, we see those sidewalks come out of compliance and they either heave or settle. That causes obviously some of what you see like in the pictures on this final slide. You see things that occur like on this left-hand photo, or tree roots, obviously. A young tree planted next to a sidewalk 50 years later actually heaves a sidewalk. In some of the others where you see the cracking, like in photo number 3, sometimes that's just a matter of maybe somebody thinking that the sidewalk is a driving surface and they've parked a vehicle on that and they've possibly busted the sidewalk. But I'd say it varies. I mean, we would expect to see 20-plus years of life out of any sidewalk based on normal conditions.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Eric. We have a motion and a second. Please cast your votes. Motion carries. Thank you, Eric. Okay. Item B is ratifying and approving Addenda Number 1, resolution extending the time to award contract and awarding contract to Wind Construction Company as the lowest responsible bidder for project MS0051, Bricktown infrastructure improvements bounded by Mickey Mantle Drive on the east, Reno Avenue on the south, Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad on the west, and Flaming Lips Alley on the north, and approving contract and bonds in the amount of $660,993, also with TIF funds. Any questions relative to item B? Okay. Please cast your votes. Motion carries. Item C, joint economic development agreement with the City of Oklahoma City and Bricktown Apartments, LLC, to provide assistance in development financing of the Steel Yard residential and commercial building project at the southeast corner of Lincoln Avenue and East Sheridan Avenue in the amount not to exceed $4,060,000, also with TIF funds. Any questions or comments relative to the Steel Yard Economic Development Assistance Agreement?
I just want to point out that this incentive is being provided to this project. The project is to build a 250-unit apartment building and about a 335-space parking garage to support the residential. This has been a very, very complicated project. The developer has been doing a great job addressing some pretty serious environmental problems on the site and some infrastructure issues that included 2 96-inch diameter storm sewers that ran diagonally across the property and that are now being relocated. So that's a lot of the construction you see down on that end of Bricktown right now. And the incentives that we're providing is $1 million in a low-interest loan, and then $3,060,000 that'll be paid out over time as the increment is generated. So a little bit different approach than what we've done in the past, and helps us address some of our cash flow issues and the need to not borrow any more money in the future. So.
And Kathy, these would be rental units, correct?
Right. They are they are rental. The other thing I'd like to point out is that the developer has received some funding through the city that's called the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, and it was to provide affordable housing choices to people, and so a certain percentage of the units will be affordable. So it's really a great project that addresses a lot of different kinds of issues and problems, and I think it's going to be a real good anchor for the east end of Bricktown.
Entertain a motion. Okay. Please cast your votes. Motion carries. Thank you. Item D, joint resolution with the City of Oklahoma City approving amendment to the Midtown HC LLC Economic Development Agreement dated April 14, 2009, and authorizing acceptance of revised deeds of declaration of covenants for Midtown Properties project, which includes 12 parcels near Northwest 10th Street and North Walker Avenue, also with TIF funds. Any comments relative to D? And I believe, Kathy, you might have some comments.
Yeah, and I may ask Wiley to jump in here, but we recently had, through discussions with Oklahoma County, realized that some of our language about how we handled minimum tax payments, the requirement for the developer to make minimum tax payments, really didn't fit in with the way the county assesses property taxes. So we've had to go back and change several of our agreements that are still outstanding. So really, items D through H incorporate that new language. And I don't, Wiley, if you want to add anything.
This is the first in the series. This is about a third of the projects we've done. So in the next 2 agendas, we'll probably have some additional ones where we're just cleaning up the language to make our covenants consistent with the process that we now have to use to get the minimum payment.
Cleaning up the language, but we have to vote on each one respectively. So listen up as we clean up each one respectively. Chair would entertain a motion on item D. Okay, please cast your votes. Motion carries. Item E, joint resolution with the City of Oklahoma City approving the amendment to Midtown HC Mixed-Use Project Economic Development Agreement and authorizing acceptance of the revised deeds of declaration of covenants, which includes 4 parcels near Northwest 10th Street and North Walker Avenue. Please cast your votes. Motion carries. Item F, joint resolution with the City of Oklahoma City approving the amendment to 10th Street Parking Garage and Mixed-Use Development Project Economic Development Agreement and authorizing acceptance of revised deeds of declaration of covenants, including 4 parcels near Northwest 10th Street and North Broadway Avenue. Please cast your votes. Motion carries. Joint resolution with the Central Oklahoma Transportation and Parking Authority and the City of Oklahoma City approving the amendment to the Century Center Mixed-Use Redevelopment Project Economic Development Agreement and accepting the revised deed of declaration of covenants, 100 West Main Street.
We can go ahead and vote, but you missed this one, 10th Street.
Oh, I thought I just did that.
No, you did. It's kind of cut in half. You did E. Did she do F? Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Listen up, Francis.
I will. Too many.
I'm trying to rattle them off. Okay.
Okay.
We didn't make the motion on F. Move approval on F. Second. We did F.
I confused you. It's my
I'm sorry, I will go slower. We're on G now. You
We
caught
agree.
up?
We agree.
Okay, thank you. G, I'm teasing you. Item G, joint resolution with the Central, okay, I just read that. Okay, do I hear a motion? We are item G. Okay, please cast your votes. Motion carries. Item H, joint resolution with the City of Oklahoma City approving the amendment to 21C Museum Hotel Redevelopment Project Economic Development Agreement, authorizing the substitution of a leasehold mortgage agreement as security for the promissory note and loan agreement, approving a revised deed of declaration of covenants, authorizing the chairman or vice chairman to execute the deed of declaration of covenants and the lender's acknowledgement for the leasehold mortgage upon execution by covenanter and mortgagor, and authorizing the execution of an acceptable form of a subordination, non-disturbance, and attornment agreement, provided that said agreement is consistent with the terms of this resolution and the amended economic development agreement as determined by the municipal counselor's office. Entertain a motion. I've threatened y'all, I apologize. Please cast your votes. Motion carries. Thank you for your understanding, and I'm sorry. Item J. Yes, Wiley.
I probably do need to make you a little bit aware on H. In our normal agreements, we get a standard mortgage on the real estate property for loaning money. In this particular case, the Hall family doesn't want to sell their property to the developer, so they're entering into a long-term lease, over 50-year lease. And so we're accepting a leasehold mortgage in place of a regular mortgage, which is a little different than the other items we took up. So, and in addition, we're cleaning up the language. So I wanted to point out both of those. I know you've already, but I wanted to be clear everybody understood that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. All right. Item J. Item J is to amend the contract with BKD Audit Services for the fiscal year 2014-2015 not to exceed $23,666, period for July 1st, 2015 to June 30th, 2016, and that would be through GALT and TIF funds. Please cast your votes. Motion carries. Thank you. And item K is Park Avenue Retail Enhancement Study presentation. And Ian Colgan will be giving us that presentation, and we appreciate you giving us as such.
Good afternoon, all. I'm here to give a brief overview of the Park Avenue Retail Enhancement Study. A little bit of background. This was a project started last year and ended just recently this year. It's a partnership between the city, the Alliance, DOKC, and the Chamber to examine, in the title, the retail enhancement of Park Avenue in the general area in terms of a focus of looking to recreate or enhance the area for the purposes of retail being everything from dining and retail goods and entertainment. It was a study that focused equally on the retail market as well as the physical component of Park Avenue, the buildings and the streetscape, so that we can work hand in hand in creating an ideal retail environment in the future. We hired a consulting team of Downtown Works out of Seattle and an architect, Hiku Abada, out of St. Louis, and that's the consultant team that the group worked with over the past year. So through the analysis the consultant provided us, they did one thing, which was encourage the focus on Park Avenue in the short term, that basically validated the examination of Park Avenue in this study, when we could have looked at all sorts of different areas of downtown or downtown on the whole. A couple of different reasons for that. One, Park Avenue was thought to be ripe for opportunity for retail enhancement based on the level of activity. It's the highest density of office employment in the entire city. It has complementary hotel and residential units, and so which makes up a good downtown urban environment to work with. Has connectivity and continuity through different districts. There are a lot of emerging districts throughout downtown, but it makes sense to focus on Park Avenue as the central hub of all those and how they'd connect in the future. It had a good scale, an urban scale with which to work with in an urban retail context, and had a lot of existing quality operators to build off of. It was not a vacant or dilapidated area. There was a lot of strengths to work off of. So in looking at existing conditions, there are some opportunities looked at versus some constraints. One of the opportunities we looked at in the market is that when you look at the expected expenditures on a daily basis of the office workers, hotel guests, visitors, and residents in the study area, the demand outstripped the supply in terms of retail sales or retail square footage on Park Avenue. So the orange bars are the demand, kind of a low and a high range, the blue being supply. So regardless of category, food, beverage, services, or general apparel, furnishings, and other, which is GAFO, the anticipated demand outstripped supply. So that was positive news. Another finding was that a significant amount of the space in the Park Avenue study area, while occupied and not many very vacant spaces, a lot of the prime real estate was made up of non-retail uses. So the ground floor, this blue, were non-retail. So there are offices, there are vacancies, there are banks, things like that, which are valid uses within the district. But when you consider the opportunity to focus retail dining or entertainment uses on those primary spots, there's a lot of opportunity, not necessarily even just for growth in Park Avenue, but also a reconfiguration of the district to have better performance. So this opportunity balanced against our physical environment, which is the primary constraint. So Park Avenue has multiple different levels of movement. We have a sky bridge system and an underground system. The First National has an interior concourse. All of these work against the components that across the country we would expect to see as ideal urban retail environments that are focused on a primary street at the ground level. We have buildings along the street that were not designed in a way to encourage ideal mixed-use fashion with a delineated ground floor for commercial spaces with uses above. And even if you can, go back one, even if you see, even when there is retail, there are architectural and design components to the buildings that aren't as obvious as they could be. So looking across the street with the women's fashion and on Park and Robinson, you can look across the street and the lack of signage and design details there don't necessarily advertise to the typical pedestrian that there is existing retail and destinations on the corridor. So summary of the retail strategies that were come up, and they're come of retail and design strategies that were in the study. The first one was building critical mass as an anchor. So we asked the consultant to examine opportunities for anchor uses within the district, like a pharmacy or other things like that. One of the main conclusions was that just building a critical mass of similar uses, whether it's dining or retail, is in and of itself an anchor. So the more uses you can cluster in one area is better thought of as an anchor than thinking about how to recruit big uses as a traditional A versus B component for retail. Being strategic with primary storefronts, so considering how our primary frontage, which is the ground floor directly on Park Avenue, can be enhanced and businesses can thrive with that frontage as opposed to other secondary frontages. Activating Park Avenue with those storefronts. Considering alternate interim uses, that a lot of the market demand that we think is out there isn't necessarily going to drop on our laps right away, that there's a trajectory of implementation that I'll discuss in a second, and then a lot of alternate uses may be considered while we reach the optimal retail configuration for the district. And again, future linkages. So this is a hub. It's a center of retail, but it connects to other areas that are emerging, like to the west of us with Hines and Clayco development, to the south, Marriott Gardens and a potential convention center. So how the central component of Park Avenue, which actually isn't a main street, it's actually a contained retail environment, connects to those areas is also a consideration of the future about how it functions. Another specific strategy that was involved is one considering First National. So we had to do this study in a study area where significant, probably one of the most important buildings in the entire corridor, the ownership and the future of it was kind of up in the air. But we included a lot of different components in the strategy so that we'd be prepared for when an owner came along and had a better future for the site. So we wanted to make sure that if we worked in partnership with that owner, that we'd work to activate the building's primary frontage along Park Avenue, more doors and accessibility to Park Avenue rather than the interior, making sure that the pedestrian zone is built out like Project 180. P180 will not be touching First National for a variety of reasons. So we want to make sure a streetscape is brought back to Park Avenue of the scale and quality that Project 180 will bring to Park Avenue. And especially just focusing on the exterior components of the building as much as historic tax credits, if they're used, will allow. One thing I mentioned is the phased implementation of the retail strategy. So a recommended merchandise mix was proposed, but this is a long-term mix that we need to build towards. We have a lot of demand for retail, but there's a lot of nuance to that demand. For instance, a lot of that retail demand, you can see on the left for food and beverage, manifests itself in specific categories and specific times of day. So another way of saying that is the primary market right now is the office user, and they consume retail and goods and dining in the middle of the day. And when they go home, there's some hotel and there's some residential uses, but it's not really enough to support a whole district. And that's what way we see Park Avenue today, is there's a lot of thriving uses during the day, but we want to examine opportunities for restaurants, for example, to have lunch and dinner, for retail to thrive at night and on weekends. So according to that, there's an implementation approach, phased approach that we want to employ. The first one is filling in the gap. So understanding that the current market is what we have to work with. Where are the gaps in that market? What additional operators, whether they're dining or retail, can we bring in? Can we orient in the street? Can we target to different places? There's going to be a lot of movement with the First National tenants. So there's a lot of activity and implementation regarding to that. Phase 2 is once we've kind of tapped that market, there's in 4 to 5 years, there's going to be additional growth. There's going to be more convention center traffic, hopefully, more tourism traffic just to the south of Park Avenue, around Marriott Gardens in that area. So how do those visitors, how are they going to be captured in the Park Avenue and influence the retail mix? In phase 3, given 10 years plus, when we have other commercial districts that have matured, really knowing where Park Avenue stands in the mix of all of downtown. We know that Bricktown is an entertainment district with hopefully some retail opportunities. We have other nighttime destinations like Midtown and Auto Alley. What is Park Avenue in the future? Is it a true mixed-use retail, dining, entertainment, or really will it always be really just focused on the office user? Design strategy. So design looked at these 6 components, everything from storefront design to open space plazas. Some comments in terms of storefront design. This is one of the things that we thought could use a lot of improvement on Park Avenue in terms of just creating a physical environment that is supportive of retail. A good example is this building with Mid-First. So if we look at today on the left, we have a space that has small signage. We have transoms covered that restrict the amount of signage and visibility for the property. Curtains in the window creates opaqueness when you want visibility into the windows and into the businesses on Park Avenue. So if that space, for example, were to be reconfigured, and the study examined 4 targeted spots on Park Avenue to conceptualize these types of improvements, this being one of them. You'd want to open up the transoms, open up the upper storefront for better signage and visibility with upper windows. We'd want larger signage, awnings, other pedestrian features, and strategically placed trees to enhance the streetscape. Another example is the Thunder Shop. So right now we have trees that have a low canopy that block views. That's going to change with Project 180. Limited opportunities with the design of Leadership Square, where you have to use window signage that blocks visibility into the retail, and there's no exterior door. So in this case, if we were to look at redesigning the space, use different trees that have a canopy that's higher, that doesn't block the storefront, has tall uncovered windows to maximize visibility, and looking at any all opportunities to have doors that front the street and not just the buildings they're in. I also looked at streetscape, so what was planned for Project 180, and recommended some various strategies here. Quickly, there are components where trees were appropriate and not appropriate, so there's considerations where we might want to place trees, but where we might want to consider other things in the amenity zone to enhance the pedestrian feel, particularly outdoor dining. So the orange areas here, from Oklahoma Tower on the left all the way to Broadway to the right, are areas that were thought to be target outdoor dining areas that were ideal. So how do you plan around streetscape improvements and the width of the sidewalk in those areas? And so overall, recommendations and an implementation plan. I would stress that we feel that these recommendations are not only appropriate for Park Avenue, but for the downtown retail environment in general, and how Park Avenue is kind of, the study is the beginning of an initiative to really focus and move forward the opportunities to enhance the downtown retail, dining, entertainment sectors. But the kind of the 4 cornerstones: 1, retail coordination, so focusing more on how to coordinate around either recruitment or management or other coordination with existing retailers or future retailers in downtown, whether that's a focused group, an implementation team, stepped up efforts by the chamber or whatnot. Development and signage guidelines, so more official approaches to how buildings can be and storefronts can be redesigned for a more optimal and ideal retail environment that's not just kind of things like the windows and other things like that, but also the signage and other features that when you look at other urban retail areas really start to increase the visibility and experience of the urban area. Development incentives, so there examine opportunities to create an incentive package either for retailers or the property owners. So there are cases where a building may be upgraded to have better lifespan or use of retail or dining. There are other cases where we might want to think about whether there are any targeted incentives to bring retailers downtown, whether it's Park Avenue or other parts of downtown. And the 4th here is develop targeted retail opportunities. Those were the special sites that were examined in the study. It was the Mid-First Bank, Thunder Shop, City Reporters Building, and then I believe First National. So we looked at different ones, and those were agreed upon by a group and stakeholders, but they're really representative areas of particular buildings and storefronts that could have a higher and better use, and how we go about improving those spaces, whether it's design or the retail investment within it. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of Ian? Obviously, you made this very short and sweet, but the actual plan was very substantial. And you have how all of this would happen, but what's the first approach of coordinating all these different constituents? How do you corral everyone?
Like the stakeholders on the corridor, for example? Well, we're lucky in that the ownership in the main study area, the Park Avenue, is small. And they've been engaged all along, and from the middle to the end have been very supportive of the initiative. So we have high stakeholder involvement and buy-in all ready to move forward. In terms of implementation, we've organized an action committee that started in January that is basically the same stakeholders that funded the plan, that has been meeting every 2 weeks and have been working through a work plan really for downtown retail in general, not just Park Avenue, but Park Avenue gave an opportunity to form the group and really focus on downtown retail, and we're kind of working on different task items to move all this forward. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Appreciate it. Okay. General Manager reports. Brent?
As you saw on the docket, we've been making some significant payments on projects. We continue to have projects that are coming, finalizing. A couple of them would be the OCU Law School. They're finalizing that. The students are having classes there, but they're still doing some of their improvements. Other projects that have been completed that we're making payments on is the Carnegie Center project. That one has been completed, and we made the payments along with the level apartments. That one's been open for a significant amount of time, but other than that, there hasn't been much activity. But we've got a lot of projects under construction, under design, and more are on their way. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Guess there are no further questions. Thank you, Brent. Any comments from the staff? Trustees? Citizens that are all on this side? You're all clustered. They're all staff. Okay. Hearing none, thank you very much for a great meeting. This meeting is adjourned.